Hello, 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 guys. Good evening. Konbanwa, minasan. Also, here am I, once again, your boy Shrimp, and we're here to do on more art, and designing. And so, I would like to ask for forgiveness, and yeah, sorry everyone for last time, my last video. I just realized that that video I lowered the volume of my um, my output for my computer audio, and so the audiobook was having a very low volume, and I didn't double check before playing or started my stream when I lowered the volume earlier because I was trying to talk to you guys and there was music, and I've learned my lesson today. I should pretty much just kill the music when I'm starting to talk to you guys, and yeah, just max it out again, or just yeah, keep it max so that when I play the audiobook, you can all listen to it. So yeah, anyways, back to my design today. Yeah, if you can notice, I've updated the thumbnail. So we're entering volume 2, so why not? I'll just change the thumbnail to volume 2 already because we're about to enter it. And pretty much the cover for this volume also is like describing what just recently happened. Yeah, we got Bastia here, Zadaris, and Vigoro. Yeah, Vigoro, and the mink boy, Mr. Vanley. So this is a very wonderful cover art for the what you call it, light novel. Yeah, for the light novel, and it is the volume 2 of this series, and we're entering that pretty much in the next few chapters. I think it starts at chapter 27. At we're chapter 24 right now. For my last video, I would try to think of a way, maybe if I can update the video or try uploading it with some audio, a different audio. But I don't know. I'll try what I can do and research. But yeah, sorry about that. If you're really curious about the story last video that I did, you can check it out in Novels.pl always. I've been reading it. I've been reading all my light novels and web novels in that website. So you go check it out. It's a very nice website. You can play an audiobook for it. Although the the narrator or the reader has a very different kind of accent and sometimes can't pronounce some Japanese words that are being added on the story, the translation of the light novel or not or any novels. But I think it's pretty much okay. I think because gets used you get used to it. When I started, I was kind of awkward for me, but the long time that I keep listening, it actually started to sound right for me because it's a monotone style of talking. It doesn't have a female or it's pretty much a male voice, but it's not very, uh, you know, uh, uh, just a monotone voice, so that you can fit any kind of voice you could imagine to the voice narrator while he's talking. So that's pretty much what I do. I try to remember some voice actors or anime characters that I've listened to before and try to like paste it down to the to the narrator's voice. So yeah, or even the characters. It's a good thing that this light novel has a art for the cover and stuff, so that you can see the characters that we are reading up on right now. So you can see Zeta is here. She looking really young, even though she's an old grandma. And her daughter Bastia over here. And so this is Zeta is Vandally. Yeah, Vandally, the main character. So yeah, let's just go ahead and start with this design and adventure again, because let's not waste more time. Okay, let's continue with this designing. So here we are. We're back to this fan art I'm doing. I'll probably update more of the character and move on to the background. I'll probably move on to this neon colored rocks over here. Uh, the problem of this, if you can see it in my small the what should I call this screen tablet right now, it's not very neon like, but in my second screen it's actually very neon. So that's probably the right color that you're seeing right now. So I'll probably change this color a bit, try to play around. Yeah, and then yeah, pretty much if I can finish all the characters right now, probably I'll tackle this rocks over here, this grass, add something on it, and then the other background, the parts of the background, yeah, just add some few more colors just to blend it. Yeah, that's not very time tasking, I think. Is that a word? Time tasking, where I'm already inventing words here. Sorry about that. But yeah, let's just get this this art style, uh, art design going. So yeah, I'll go play the video, and this time uh, the audio is full max for the volume. So yeah. So here we go. The dead mage who doesn't want a four
Chapter
time.
24, my allies and my enemies cannot be stopped once we start moving. The day after finding out about the existence of a large pack of ghouls led by a damp through Luciliano's report, Marshal Thomas Palpabeck was in the office of the villa that he was staying in, battling against a mountain of documents. Normally, organizing and dispatching a monster extermination force would be the work of the region's ruler and adventurers guild. However, in this case, the size of the extermination force was unusually large, and knights and soldiers of the nation's army would be participating as well as adventurers. The local ruler, Viscount Berno Balches, had handed over command to Marshal Palpabeck and begged him for assistance. Of course, that didn't mean that there was no work for Viscount Balches to do. But as everything was under Marshal Palpabeck's jurisdiction, it was his signature that was needed as the final approval for each document, and if there were any mistakes, it would be his responsibility. This arrangement had been decided this morning. In order to increase the number of participating personnel beyond what was originally planned, order documents needed to be sent to request the use of knights and soldiers of the nation's army. As the numbers of soldiers and knights were being increased, the budget for equipment also needed to increase. On top of that, more provisions would be required to feed those soldiers and knights. More spies needed to be dispatched to keep watch on the Devil's Nest. The negotiations with the Adventurers Guild were handled by the finance minister, not the marshal. Thus, everything needed to go through the nobleman working under the finance minister, only adding to the height of the mountain of documents. The silver lining was that the Amid Empire had recently won a battle over the Orborn Kingdom while suffering few losses, so there were plenty of funds to work with. Well, even requesting the use of that budget required the marshal to read through and sign yet another document. This looks terrible. Seeing you having to spend your already short lifespan on such tedious work, I cannot suppress my sympathy for you, Thomas. Noticing the cold night air and a voice coming from a window that he had no recollection of opening, Marshal Palpabeck finished his signature that he was in the midst of writing before putting down his pen. If you feel that way, won't you help me? My immortal friend. As he looked up, there was a single bat in front of him. I believe that I have helped you plenty, my friend. Or could it be, Thomas, that you have realized the emptiness of being famous in human society and come to desire eternity? Flowing words spoken in a composed tone came from the mouth of the bat. Ordinary people would have been surprised at the bat that was calling the marshal by his first name, but the marshal gave an unimpressed response. No, I have no intention of becoming one of you, And I am sure that you people wouldn't want that, either. Do not speak such insincere words, vampire. This bat was a familiar scent by a vampire. Marshal Thomas Palpabek was the second son born to the Palpabek family of earls. The Shield Nation of Mage had been entrusted the role of being the nation with the most powerful army, defending the empire from the Orborm Kingdom's army for generations. Even considering the long history of the Palpabek family of earls and their involvement in Mage's military affairs, Thomas had been an exceptional young man. But no matter how exceptional he was still only the second son. Even so, if the family's eldest son had been a great failure, then perhaps he could have become the one to succeed the family. However, though the eldest son was a little inferior to Thomas, he was still a fine man. It was clear in everyone's eyes that Thomas was superior in both the literary and military arts. Thomas and the eldest son both understood this as well. However, no matter how clear the difference between them was, because it was a moderate difference, the family would not go to the lengths of denying succession to the elder son to make Thomas an earl. No matter which of the brothers rose to the position of marshal, strongholds, soldiers and knights wouldn't change. The vassals that had supported the Palpabek family of earls wouldn't change, either. Including small-scale skirmishes, war with the Orborm Kingdom continued to occur once every few years, but the Shield Nation of Mage was a shield, after all. The ones standing in the position of Mage's marshal were only in charge of defensive battles. The ones in command of the glorious battles of invasion had always been the other marshals or generals of the Amid Empire. And so, no matter how superior Thomas was to his elder brother, a future where he would succeed the family of earls was impossible. At this rate, Thomas would be adopted as a son-in-law by a noble family with the court rank of baron or lower that had only daughters, or become a vassal who served his older brother. At that time, a vampire appeared before him. Do you not want to succeed your family of earls? Can you bear the fact that your elder brother who is inferior to you will stand above you merely because he was born a little earlier? Thomas collaborated with the vampire who whispered these words to him, succeeded his family of earls in place of his elder brother who perished in an unforeseen accident and rose to the position of marshal. Cuckoo, indeed. A collaborator in a nobleman's position as high as yours is precious, after all. The vampire implied that without his position as marshal, Thomas would be worthless. Unable to endure any more idle talk, Thomas spoke. You know what needs to be done, don't you? Thomas, I certainly do. It is to do with the damp born between the traitor Valen and a dark elf woman, is it not? We went to the lengths of providing you with the information, but it seems that you have let him slip away, haven't you? Vampire. Thomas wasn't knowledgeable about the details of vampire clans and factions, but he did know that they were largely divided into two main factions, those who followed the evil gods, and those who followed the goddess Vida. And this vampire belonged to the faction that followed the evil gods. However, they were not planning humanity's ruin or anything of the sort. After the demon king Eugenides was destroyed, the surviving evil gods who had lost their ruler broke up, acting on their own as they pleased. There were those who searched for the fallen demon king's sealed flesh in order to resurrect him. There were those who plotted revenge against the humans and gods that had brought about the demon king's ruin. There were the lazy who simply indulged in inactivity and delicious food. There were those who had decided that there was nothing of worth in this world and departed for others. There were even those who struggled with the other evil gods for power. And then there were those who had abandoned their original goals and simply did everything they could to satisfy their own desires. The evil god that the vampire here was serving belonged to this group. But for that evil god and the vampires that served him, dampers, which were half vampires, were apparently creatures that needed to be eliminated for various reasons. Dampers weren't decisively problematic for them. If dampers were to join the humans and begin hunting vampires, it would be an eyesore. In order to preserve the noble pride of the vampires. As an example to other vampires in the faction. Also, simply because it was interesting to torment and kill dampers in front of other vampires who spoke of things like romance and love. Those were the reasons. The owner of the bat in front of Thomas was a vampire whose name and face Thomas did not know. He had been ordered by an even higher-ranking vampire to hunt down this damp that had been born between the subordinate vampire Velen and a dark elf. These vampires had finished Velen, but had deliberately allowed the dark elf who was pregnant with the damp to escape. Of course, this was not an act of compassion. The vampires had wanted to see this dark elf and damper die gruesome deaths at the hands of the humans. The evil god that they served would be particularly pleased by such a show. That was why they had given Thomas information regarding the damp. But in the end, only the dark elf mother had been killed and the damp's whereabouts had been unknown. They had assumed that the child who was of breastfeeding age at the time would have starved to death somewhere after its mother had died. But it had survived, and now it was the Ghoul King in a devil's nest far from Evbigia. When contacted by Thomas with this information, the vampire had felt the emotion of surprise that he had almost forgotten recently, and dispatched a familiar. At that time, there were many uncertain factors. Thomas, as the vampire pointed out Thomas's shortcomings, Thomas made a sour-looking face as he remembered those times. When Thomas first heard the information about the damper, he had passed that information to a promising party of adventurers called the Five-Colored Bladesthat were trying to capture the damper at the time. Thomas had intended for them to build up achievements for themselves. He had planned to use this opportunity to make strong connections, having the Five-Colored Blades accept his requests in the future and making it known that they were adventurers that were for their marshal's personal use, and if things went well, he would have made them his subordinates. However, by coincidence, High Priest Golden of the Amid Empire's Church of Elder had been staying in a village near Evbigia and intervened as a result. In addition to that, the Dark Elf had never given up the damp's location, even as she died. This caused High Priest Gordon to lose his temper. Ignoring the attempts of Thomas's subordinate to stop him, he executed her. And then the Five-Colored Bladesthat had been crucial to Thomas's plans, had left Evbigia after the Dark Elf's execution without searching for the damp. Because of that, Thomas had no choice but to leave the search for the damp to High Priest Gordon, whom he didn't have a single ounce of control over. In the end, he was unable to finish the damp off, allowing the damp the opportunity to survive. The most uncertain factor is how the damp that was of breastfeeding age was able to stay hidden from the High Priest's search and survive until now. Vampire, precisely. He even leads the ghouls and seems to have undergone a job change somewhere to acquire the job of spiritualist. Thomas, spiritualist, you say? No matter how much he has grown, it is uncertain if he is even 3 years of age, is it not? Vampire, indeed. Apparently he was able to see that the live dead was a familiar being used by the hired adventurer. Thomas, Viscount Balches, the knights and the others were under the assumption that Vandali had known what the live dead was because he had attained the job of spiritualist. Not even in their wildest dreams would they imagine that Vandali was a user of death attribute magic that had never existed in this world until now. A spiritualist, he has chosen quite a unique job. I do not believe that his father Valen had the talent. Then perhaps it is from his mother's blood? Well, it is fine. He will soon be exterminated. Isn't that right, Marshal Dono? Vampire, of course. I will eliminate the problematic damper along with the whole pack of ghouls. I am even going to be calling those irritating religious fanatics of the Church of Elder for this, after all. For Thomas, it was absolutely necessary to meet the demands of the vampires. He didn't desire immortality, nor did he feel any gratitude to them for helping him attain his court rank. He needed the vampires' power for his plans. Thomas's homeland, the Shield Nation of Mage, had always been a part of the Amid Empire ever since it was founded. The royal family of Mage was considered only equivalent to marquises in the Amid Empire. The nation was forced to endure difficult defensive battles, and the glorious victories in battle were always stolen by the Empire. Mage was suppressed by the Empire even in peaceful times, and when it tried to build up strength as a nation, the Empire would interfere and hinder it. Just when Mage would manage to build up some strength despite that, A pointless expedition would be forced upon it for some reason or another and its power would be weakened again. The Titan extermination 200 years ago had been particularly terrible. Many soldiers and heroes of that time were lost, as well as a holy lance that was a national treasure. They received no notable spoils of war in return, nor did they gain any new territory. After having been treated so terribly, it was only natural for the royals and noblemen of the Mage Shield nation to dearly wish for independency. And Thomas's plan was to deliver that wish to his homeland with his own two hands. And then he would rise to a more important social position in the newly independent Mage Shield nation, no, Mage Kingdom. For that purpose, he needed to increase the Mage Shield nation's strength while weakening the Amid Empire, little by little. The power of the vampires, who viewed the Amid Empire as their enemy, was absolutely essential for that. But that would mean calling the High Priest, would it not? He is currently a candidate to become the next cardinal. Are you planning to allow him to add more to his achievements? Vampire. Other than him, I am also planning to have the Green Wind Spearly participate as well. Who, the man who left their five-colored bladest hat, departed the Mage Shield nation? I wonder how much use a class adventurer who obtained a title because of the Heinz's work can be. He is already a B-class adventurer. But if you are so concerned, why not join us as well? We are planning to journey across the plains for 3 days in the sunlight until we reach the Devil's Nest, however. Cuckoo, I must decline that proposition. We do have confidence in you, after all. More importantly, did you contact me just to report this information? No, there is something I wanted to confirm, just in case. It is about the damp. The Golem transformation incident in Avbegia, is that not the damp's work? The mysterious incident that occurred 1 year ago, in which a town's outer walls, the ruler's house and the building of the Adventurers Guild had turned into golems and walked out of the town. The investigation was still continuing with the help of the Mages Guild, but they hadn't even figured out just how the crime was committed, let alone caught the culprit. All they had managed to do was come up with theories that were full of holes. Was this not the crime of the problematic damp? That was what Thomas suspected. He had not mentioned it in the morning in front of Viscount Balches and Luciliano, however, because he had no positive evidence and even thought it was a preposterous theory himself. Do not be so foolish. Vampire. In fact, Thomas's theory was nothing more than a poor joke to the vampire. You humans consider damp as dangerous as they have fewer weaknesses than us vampires, but it seems that you overestimate them. The qualities of a damper, especially those to do with the abilities of a vampire, are heavily influenced by the vampire parent. If the parent excels in the use of magic, then the child will as well. If the parent has the ability to transform into a bat, then the child has a high chance of possessing that ability as well. Vampire. Conversely, if the parent is not particularly gifted in magic for a vampire, then the child will have similar qualities. I know that much. Thomas, as the vampire and Thomas were saying, a damp's talent as a vampire depended on the vampire parent. The vampires that followed the evil gods found it ironic that damp children with the mixed blood of other races were the ones that inherited the vampire parent's qualities so strongly, however. Though Valen was indeed exceptionally resistant to the sun, he was a subordinate who was not particularly strong for his age other than that. I heard that he was only able to cast simple spells. His jobs were apprentice thief, and fighter. It is unimaginable that he had dormant talents. And even if Valen did possess some qualities, a child that was 1 or 2 years old at the time would not have been able to make use of them. Vampire. I suppose that is true. Thomas, is the mother not more suspicious? That damper is apparently a spiritualist. Perhaps he has borrowed the power of his mother's spirit. Vampire. Those with the spiritualist job can communicate with spirits and gain knowledge from them. Those with advanced ability with the job can take it a step further and use magic that those spirits had used while they were alive. The vampire wondered if the damper, who had become a spiritualist at a young age, could be making use of secret alchemy techniques that his mother had used while she was alive. But this time, it was Thomas who refuted his theory. I investigated the mother. She was a D-class adventurer, and while she could use spiritual magic, she seemed to have no understanding of alchemy. I cannot imagine that she knew any secret alchemy techniques. Thomas, then I am sure that it was just a coincidence that this incident occurred around the same time. Is your business with me finished? Well then, I will excuse myself. Even we who live for all eternity cannot afford to spend our time idly. With those words, the bat flapped its wings silently and took off out the window. Thomas snorted as he watched it fly away while closing the window, and then let out a whisper. A coincidence, is it? The Shield Nation of Mage was investigating the Avbijia incident not merely as something that concerned only that small town in some remote region, but as a major event that shook the whole country. The reason for that was because if what happened in that town were to happen at the citadel, no matter how sturdy the forts, no matter how tall and thick the walls, all of it would be meaningless. No, if the golems decided to attack the humans inside instead of leaving like they had in Avbijia, even an elite army would sustain heavy losses, unable to make free use of their strength. The attacks would come from the walls, ceilings and floors. How would troop formation be maintained in such a situation? To prevent such an event from occurring, the mystery of how the town's outer walls had turned into golems had to be solved. However, even the upper ranks of the Mages Guild had been unable to come up with an answer. In the first place, golems were things that an alchemist spent effort and mana to create. In order to create a golem, materials had to be prepared and divided into separate parts for the arms, legs, and torso. All kinds of catalysts and spirit powders needed to be applied for the different parts while casting spells, and then an artificial core needed to be implanted inside to make it move. After all of that, one would have produced a golem. That was why it was impossible to make golems from the outer walls of the town that had already been built, the ruler's house and adventurers' guild building that had been in use, and the earth of the fields that the farmers had been plowing every day to produce crops. If there was an alchemist who could do this, then not only the Shield Nation of Mage but the entire Amid Empire would do their best to apprehend him. If that was impossible, then they would cover up his existence. Indeed, it is just a coincidence after all. There was no way for a damper who was 3 years of age at most to be such an exceptional individual. Thomas took on the facial expression of Marshal Palpapek once more as he picked up his pen and turned his attention back to the documents. Perhaps if Luciliano had realized that Vandali had turned the Ent-made outer wall of the Orc village into golems, if he had figured out that Vandali possessed an abnormally large mana pool, then Marshal Palpapek might have come to a different conclusion. Well, even if he were to figure it out now, it would already be too late. His mistake was the poor choice of relying on his common knowledge to deal with the unprecedented situation of a damp child being a king that had united the ghouls. Around the time Marshal Palpapek was having a private conversation with a vampire, Vandali and the other ghouls were traveling back towards their home village. The 100 or so captive ghoul women that they had rescued were in poor physical states after having been left in poor living conditions for so long, and because their food intake had been deliberately restricted to keep their strength low. Some of them had limbs that had been broken and then healed at crooked angles. They weren't in any state to walk long distances. The female adventurers who were aspiring to undergo the ghoul transformation ritual weren't any better off. They were considerably weakened as well. More than 100 women in this state had to be carried through a devil's nest that monsters dwelled in. It was quite the difficult task. The one carrying out the task was Sam, and the other carriages created by Vandali. Get up, combine, transform. The remains of the Ent-made wood golems that the orcs had destroyed? Vandali turned them into wood golems once more and used their golem transmutation skill to have them combine into a single piece of wood. And then, using Sam as a model, he created carriages from them. Normally, making a carriage using only wood with no metal parts wouldn't go very well, but because the Ent logs were as hard as iron while still possessing the properties of wood, and because the entire carriage was a golem, it moved without any problems. In fact, the wheels turned on their own without needing anything to pull the carriages. Fortunately, there was an incredible amount of ruins lying around to be used as materials. Under Bogoggan's orders, the orcs had probably cut down enough ints to make them extinct in this devil's nest. If you were to live in a human city, boy, I am sure you would be able to make a living doing this. Zadyrus, building carriages? The materials here are good, but I'm sure they're not particularly worth selling if you compare them to something built by a specialized craftsman. Vandally, no, I am talking about the lumber. In human cities, they pay gold to obtain lumber, don't they? With this technique, you could even create lumber from sawdust, could you not? Zadyrus, I can definitely make lumber as long as the wood hasn't been burned to ashes, but vandally, unlike metal, one could not put a piece of wood that had already been cut into a furnace to melt it to have a piece of usable material again. That was why carpenters devoted their time to improving their technique. However, if Vandally used his transmutation skill, he could freely turn already cut pieces of wood back into a larger piece of timber, even though he didn't possess such techniques. If he wanted, he could turn branches and sawdust produced by sawing fallen trees into lumber that could be used to make pillars or floorboards. Even the ghouls who possessed no monetary system knew that this was an innovative technique. But I don't really want to make that my occupation. Vandally. Why is that? Could you not make a large profit by doing so? Zadyrus, as Zadyrus asked the unenthusiastic Vandally these questions, he answered with a sigh. Getting to the point of being able to make a large profit seems like it will be very troublesome. What Vandally was able to do was essentially wood scrap recycling. Since it was a recycling process, the timber he produced would be second-hand goods. On Earth, people might think of it as regenerated wood and he might be able to play the ecologically friendly game, but Lambda hadn't seemed to have even invented steam engines, let alone reached technologically advanced civilization. It was doubtful how much value ecologically friendly products would have or if people would even understand the concept of ecological friendliness. Considering that, what kind of price would second-hand goods made from scraps sell for? On top of that, this process was impossible without Thegelum transmutation skill. He would soon be learning alchemy, but he wouldn't be able to create a magic item that would allow others to use this skill. In other words, Vandally would have to do everything personally. In the end, if he tried to profit by using Thegelum transmutation skill to create ecologically friendly timber, there was a chance that he would be working long hours for little gain. For Vandally, who had lived with a luxury complex, this was an unacceptable choice. Well, if it was high-quality lumber like ebony on Earth, I might be able to earn a lot and I could do the same with building stones, so would marble but if there is something like a stonemason's guild, they might investigate the source of my stones. For lumber, there might be something like a lumberjack's guild, too. It seems that human society is complicated. Boy, let us leave the deliberation at that, shall we? Zadyrus patted Vandaly's head with these words, as he had begun to use his brain to contemplate the potential troubles. Incidentally, the int lumber that Vandally had used to create the carriages was worth 10 times more than common wood like cedar and pine in human society, but Vandally would not learn that for quite some time to come. Vandally has acquired the carpentry skill. The level of the strength and follower skills has increased. Botjan. Leave the women to me. And Sam's rank had increased from the great amount of experience points that he had earned in yesterday's battle. The level 3 ghost carriage had run over and killed rank 5 orc generals and the rank 7 noble orc Bogoggan in addition to the rank 3 orcs. There was no doubt that a huge amount of experience points had been poured into him. Thanks to this, the dangerous spikes that Terra had attached to the carriage had fused with the carriage's body, and he was now rank 4 blood carriage. And with the skills he had gained when his rank increased, size alteration and comfort maintenance, he was particularly useful for transporting the weakened women. Size alteration was a skill that changed the size of Sam's body, allowing him to grow from his original size of being a 3-horse carriage to a 4-horse carriage, or shrink to a 2-horse carriage. Comfort maintenance was a skill that allowed him to maintain comfort inside the carriage at all times, no matter what the conditions were like outside. And thanks to the impact resistance skill, the carriage didn't vibrate at all when traveling normally. His race had changed into a dangerous-sounding one, but Sam's convenient features were steadily increasing. Because of the experience points earned in yesterday's battle, Vigoro and Sam weren't the only ones whose ranks had increased. Many of the ghouls had increased in rank to become ghoul warriors or ghoul grapplers. Among Vandaly's servants, Saria, Rita and Bonebird's ranks had also increased. Though Saria and Rita had ranked up, their races hadn't changed. They were still living high leg armor and living bikini armor. This was probably because the two of them hadn't been able to fully manifest the powers that their armor possessed before, but with the experience points that they had gained, they were now able to manifest them to some extent. The fact that their races hadn't changed was because they had developed, but still weren't using the suits of armor to their full potential. I want to hurry and become a powerful monster, a maid who wouldn't have to let Bochin allow his enemies to cut his flesh and bones in order to break the enemy's bones. I know that you want to say that that's not what a maid does, Bochin. But both Rito and I are serious about this. It seemed that the two of them had been greatly shocked by the sight of Vandali lying on the ground, covered in blood with his torso cut open. This had renewed their drive to become stronger. This was very promising news. Gee! Bonebird had become a rank 4 spectre bird. The spirit form that had covered its bones was even brighter, and from a distance, it would look like a sparkling bird of good omens. But apparently the people of some regions considered the appearance of such a monster to be a bad omen. Vandali could only hope that there were no such regions in the Orborn Kingdom. And the heaviest luggage that would be problematic to transport back to the village, the spoils of war, the corpses of the enemies. But this problem was the easiest to solve. After all, it was simple to have the spoils of war walk the distance on their own. Bufuyu. Jibugir, with the preservation spell cast on them after draining their blood to suspend their decomposition. The orcs, kobolds and the corpses of the beasts that the orcs had been using didn't need to be carried after they had been turned into zombies. In fact, since they could carry the weapons and armor they had used while they were alive and the belongings that they had stolen from adventurers, they were luggage carriers rather than luggage themselves. Even though they were zombies, their decomposition had been halted with death attribute magic and not even one day had passed since they died, so their flesh and organs were still nice and fresh. After getting back to the village, Vandali would take the spirits possessing them back out and they would turn back into normal corpses and there would be no problem in harvesting materials from their bodies and eating their meat. But monsters didn't know this. To them, these were zombies, not prey. And so the zombies wouldn't be attacked by monsters and there was no need to have someone watch them to make sure monsters wouldn't take them away. One problem was that the zombies walked slowly, but since the weakened ghoul women were being transported, it didn't matter that the zombies were slow. Having Vandali turn all the prey that we hunt into zombies from now on would make them easier to transport back to the village. Vigoro and the others approved of this method. After Vandali regained his composure from Zedaris's soothing words, he walked on, not paying any attention to the zombie of Gogan who was letting out a moan. It's not that there was no space for him to ride on Sam or one of the other carriages. He was turning 3 soon, so he wanted to start building up his physical fitness. Say, Vandali, what do you think about me becoming an undead Orgolem? And then I would become strong and fight with you. Don't you think that would be wonderful? I'm happy that you feel that way, but I don't know about that. If you stay in the same vessel for too long, the shape of your spirit can change, so I don't know if that might affect me resurrecting you later. If a creature's spirit stayed in a certain vessel for a long time, the shape of its spirit would change to match that vessel. For example, Sam was originally a human man, but if Vandali were to remove his spirit from the carriage that he possessed, his spirit would likely resemble the carriage, not his appearance from when he was alive. That was how easy it was for spirits that had lost their bodies to change shape. Strong malice, hatred and lingering regrets were necessary for a spirit to maintain its original shape. And since you have almost no malice or hatred, I think you'd be influenced really easily by the shape of your vessel, Mom. That's why I think it's better not to do that. Honestly, Vandali couldn't believe that. The fact that Darsa had almost no hatred and malice. How could she not lose herself to hatred and malice after having been killed in such a cruel way? He had once asked her directly, but she had only told him, because Vandali is alive and doing well. I see. Well then, make sure you don't do anything like letting your enemy cut your flesh and bones to break his bones, okay? If Darsa's words were true and Vandali still being alive was the reason she worried about him without feeling any malice towards those who had killed her, then that only made his desire for revenge on them burn even stronger. Don't do anything dangerous against the people who are coming with an extermination force this time, either. But now wasn't the time for that. It was nowhere near, not even close to the time for that. Vandali suppressed his desire for revenge back into the bottom of his heart. Yeah, I promise. I won't do anything dangerous. Name, Bonebird rank, 4 race, Spectre Bird level, 37 passive skills, Dark Vision Spirit Form, level 3, level up. Superhuman Strength, level 2, active skills, Silent Steps, level 1 Swift Flight, level 2, level up. projectile fire, level 2, new. Name, Sam. Rank, 4 ace, blood carriage level, 72 passive skills, spirit form, level 3 superhuman strength, level 3 rough road travel, level 2 impact resistance, level 2 precise driving, level 3 comfort maintenance, level 1, new. Active skills, silent steps, level 1 high speed travel, level 1 charge, level 3, level up. Size alteration, level 1, new. Monster explanation, blood carriages, chariots covered in an indescribable amount of death and hatred, so much that they are stained pured with the blood of both their enemies and allies on the battlefield and turned into undead to become blood chariots. These are the carriage version of those. Normally, the body of a carriage wouldn't be covered in such an indescribable amount of death and hatred, so Sam may be the first instance of a blood carriage appearing in Lambda. Blood carriages are undead that feel only the urge to murder and think only of crushing living things to death, so they do not allow anyone to ride them even if there is space for them to do so. However, Sam allows people to ride him, mainly Vandally, and even does everything he can to make his journeys comfortable for his passengers. Perhaps because he has been training using his precise driving skill every night so that there will be no problems when they cross the mountain range in the future, he has acquired their comfort maintenance and size alteration skills. In addition, his strength in battle has been improved due to the spikes and armor that Terra has installed. Furthermore, this additional equipment was fused with the carriage that is Sam's body when his rank increased. Chapter 25, The Journey by Carriage, Pushing Through the Mountains. As Vandally and the others made a triumphant return home, they were welcomed with cheers from the ghouls who had remained in the village. They had expanded the village beforehand in preparation, but since the population had increased by over 100 ghoul women who had been held captive, it now exceeded the village's limits. But nobody cared about that. And then the rescued ghoul women and adventurers were allowed to rest while Vandally undid the undead transformation on the food and spoils of war that had walked here on their own two legs so that they could be properly dismantled. The tongues and eyeballs of the kobold mages could be used as materials for alchemy. The fur of the kobold generals could be used for armor and clothing, while their fangs would make good knives. The only thing to be gained from ordinary orcs was their meat, but the tendons of the orc generals could be used to make bowstrings. Meanwhile, the tongues, eyeballs and livers of the orc mages would be used as more ingredients for alchemy. And every part of the noble orcs' bodies could be used as materials. Their meat would be used for food, their intestines would be used in alchemy or to make medicine, their skin would be used to make leather items, their bones would be used to make armor or weapons, their genitals would be used in medicines that boosted sexual function, their golden hair would be used to weave stab-proof clothing. And, of course, their magic stones. If one were to bring these to an adventurer's guild, they could be paid a hefty sum for them. Yufufufu, materials, I wonder what I should make. It's a bit gruesome but she's having a lot of fun, Vandally thought as he saw Terra skillfully handling a knife to dismantle Bgogan into pieces while humming to herself. As he did so, she suddenly turned around. Come to think of it, Vansama, what will you do from now? The knife dripping wet with blood and fat that she was holding close to her face was gruesome indeed, but it seemed that she was concerned about what Vandaly's future plans were. The Ghoul King was a role that only existed while multiple ghoul villages unified against a common enemy. It was different to the king title of other races like goblins or kobolds. Now that the noble orcs had been defeated and the rest of the enemies eliminated, there was no point in Vandally continuing to be the Ghoul King, nor was there a reason for all of the ghouls to continue to stay in one place. Terra and her followers would return to their original village and go back to living their normal lives. That is precisely why I must take Vansama back with me. Terra held this thought in her heart as Vandally replied. About that, there is something I want to discuss tomorrow. Eh? Something you want to discuss with just the two of us? No, with everyone. I guessed that would be the case. Ho, ho ho ho, that night's dinner was a feast to celebrate their victory. The ghouls praised each other's deeds over grilled skewers and soups made from orc meat. The appetites of the women who had been held captive were particularly fierce. They devoured the orc meat greedily, as if in repayment for having been treated as playthings for so long. Even the female adventurers who had only been desiring death had vigorous appetites. Right now, they only wanted to undergo the ghoul transformation to become Vandaly's followers, so it seemed that Zediris's advice of your bodies won't be able to handle the ritual if you don't build up your strength a little had been effective. Vandali had never imagined that the death attribute charm skill would be effective on humans that had lost the will to live and only desired death. If I was on Earth right now, I could probably make a lot of friends just by standing near famous suicide spots. Well, if he actually did that, he would probably end up as the founder of a new religion, so even if he was on Earth, he probably wouldn't do it. Vandali munched on a noble orc skewer as he thought about this. The meat had been smeared with tear sauce made from fruits and herbs that grew in the devil's nest before being cooked. Each bite filled his mouth with the meat's juice and melted fat, but the tear sauce provided it with a clean aftertaste. It was the kind of food that he could eat endlessly. He couldn't help but to be emotionally moved by the taste of the meat. Among the foods that he had eaten since reincarnating in Lambda, the wild boars had been tasty, but the meat of the huge boars that he had been eating since he started living in this village had been even tastier. But the meat of the noble orc surpassed even that. Even high-quality pork from Earth couldn't compare to this. It was so delicious that Vandali was sure of this, even though he had never eaten high-quality pork. I won, I finally won one against them, while eating the meat of the noble orc that he would definitely not have been able to taste on Earth. He felt proud of his victory against his uncle's family. The first step in the ritual to turn human women into ghouls was to dig a hole in the ground large enough to contain all of the women undergoing it. Next, ghoul blood and the venom secreted by their claws were added to the mud while offering prayers to the goddess Vida. And then more mud was put back into the hole, submerging the women. They would then be transformed from humans into ghouls after 3 days. It just looks like we're drowning them. Staring at the mud that Kuka and the other female adventurers had been submerged in, he repeatedly used his magic to check that he could still detect signs of their life. He couldn't help it. After all, in normal circumstances, they would be suffocating to death. There is no problem with this. This is the method that has been used since long ago. Though if we tried this on races other than humans, such as monsters or other races created by Vida, they would drown. Vansama, this is how I transformed from a human into a ghoul. Hearing the approval of the two elders, Zadiris and Terra, and sensing that he could still detect the female adventurer's signs of life after 10 minutes, Vandali was convinced. More importantly, we must continue the discussion from the other day, must we not? You're right. A night had passed since the victory feast, and the ghouls' festive mood had faded away. They were gathered together and were waiting for Vandali. Including Terra, they thought that Vandali would now begin discussing the allocations of the 100 ghoul women whose home villages had been destroyed and now had no place to go, and the female adventurers that were being turned into ghouls, the promised magic items that would increase the birth rate of ghouls and Vandali's future. The women who had been made pregnant by the monsters would heal back to normal a few months after childbirth, and there wouldn't be a problem allocating 10 of them to each of the other villages. And they had even just obtained so much food that it would actually decompose before they could finish it all if it weren't for Vandali's method of preserving it. The female adventurers would probably all be treated as Vandali's spoils of war. That way, it wouldn't take any time or effort to teach them various things after their transformation into ghouls, and Vandali had achieved enough to deserve that. It was strange that one of them wasn't undergoing the ritual and under Vandali's personal care. That was probably Vandali's favorite. Vandali had promised to distribute the magic items when he made them. Zadiris's and Terra's villages would compete for which village would have Vandali stay with them, so there was no need for them to say anything about that. The great number of ghouls gathered here expected that these were the topics that would be discussed. However, Vandali proved those expectations wrong with the tone of his first word. Everyone, please listen to me calmly. By summer at latest, there will be a large army of humans coming here to kill us all. It was April. About 2 months after the news that the noble orc's village had been annihilated by a pack of ghouls led by Adamper, an extermination force of 1,000, organized under Marshal Palpapek's leadership, invaded the Devil's Nest forest. There were 300 D-class adventurers and 100 class adventurers. There was also a brigade of holy warriors of Aldo with High Priest Gordon as their leader, the B-class Green Wind Spearly who had formerly belonged to the 5 colored blades, as well as the soldiers and knights. For the sake of perfection, the Marshal had wanted to hire several more B-class adventurers, but gathering too many adventurers of B-class or above in one place would cause problems in dealing with monsters elsewhere, so he had gathered capable class adventurers instead to create an extermination force of this size. Sorry, but the damper is mine. Back then, I had to let it escape because Heinz didn't agree with me, but I'm free now. I'll add this to my list of achievements. Do as you wish. As long as the blood of an evil vampire and witch is stamped out, the god will give his blessings no matter who performs the task. The grinning Riley and High Priest Gordon, whose mouth was turned down at the corners, were the centerpieces of the extermination force, and everyone expected these two to defeat the higher rank ghouls and the damp. Even the other adventurers and knights followed their commands. Both of them were top-notch among adventurers, and since they possessed the strength of B-class that surpassed the boundaries of human capabilities, it was only natural that they were being treated this way, as the extermination force contained no adventurers of A-class or higher. Marshal Palpabek had constantly stationed spies between the town and the Devil's Nest to make sure that the ghouls didn't come to attack the town, but the ghouls had shown no movements until now. The ghouls are expecting us to come to them. I can only pray to my God that they do not strike you when your guard is down, turning you into experience points for them. Gordon, the fact that the ghouls weren't coming out of the Devil's Nest despite knowing that the humans were on the move no doubt meant that they had prepared themselves and were planning an ambush. That was the conclusion that the leaders of the extermination force, including High Priest Bormac Gordon, had come to. That was why all of the members of the extermination force looked nervous. I don't need you to tell me that. They'll just become stepping stones for me to surpass that naive Hines. Since Riley had left the 5 colored blades, the number of direct requests and the way the guild treated him had changed remarkably. He was still an obscure individual, so he was desperate to build achievements for himself by accepting the marshal's request. That was why the expression on his face was that of excitement, not nervousness. His head was full of thoughts of raising the damp's severed head in the air, deepening the trust that Marshal Palpabek had in him, having a successful career and becoming a Marquis's personal knight and spearmanship instructor. And so the extermination force entered the Devil's Nest and began searching for the enemy. They knew where the noble orc's village was, but the locations of the villages of the ghouls who had destroyed it were unknown. Since it was a dangerous Devil's Nest, they had hesitated to send in adventurers to investigate the Devil's Nest beforehand. They couldn't send spies in, as they were weaker in combat despite their information-gathering abilities. The reason for this was because they had concluded that the damp was a spiritualist. Spiritualists could communicate with the spirits of the dead to gain information. If the spies and adventurers were discovered, they would be killed mercilessly, and then the damp would gain information from their spirits. Since the dead were talkative, they had to be careful about losing personnel. The search for the enemy was difficult. We've only found goblin and kobold villages. We've encountered 2 or 3 orcs, but not a single ghoul has been seen. Yeah, and other than that, there's been huge boars, the mad boars that are superior to them, impalables, iron turtles, giant rats, nothing but beast-type monsters. It wouldn't have been unusual to at least come across a small platoon of ghouls keeping an eye on this area, but the extermination force couldn't seem to find any ghouls. No, they did find a ghoul village, but no good. All we found there were goblins who had settled in. There was nothing left in what seemed to be the remainder of a ghoul village that they found. The ghouls are definitely gathered all in one place, waiting to ambush us. This is bad. Even though we have 1,000 people, if they were to come attacking all at once, so what? I'm going to take revenge for Rickon, my younger brother. The older brother of an adventurer thought to have been killed by orcs made this angry declaration, but nobody reminded him that it was the orcs, not the ghouls, who had killed his brother. Well, the women might have survived, but there's a high chance that they've been turned into a ghoul, right? We have to save their souls as soon as possible. The male adventurer didn't object to the words of the devout elder follower. Even he agreed that after being treated as playthings and then turned into ghouls, they would be happier simply being killed. The extermination force set up an encampment in the place where the orcs' village had been as they continued their search of the Devil's Nest. However, their search turned up only monsters that weren't ghouls, and even after several days, there were no signs of the ghouls coming to attack them. Of course, that made no difference to the fact that they were staying in a dangerous Devil's Nest, but since they had more than enough manpower gathered to deal with the normal monsters appearing in this forest, the air of tension around the extermination force began to loosen. More carriage wheel tracks. What could this mean? Doesn't that mean that we've passed through here before? You idiot, the carriages are back at the encampment. The extermination force was using multiple carriages to transport supplies. Even though this Devil's Nest was a forest, there were 5-meter-long mad boars rampaging around and knocking down trees, so there were plenty of large animal trails that carriages could travel through. However, those carriages were either back at the encampment set up in the ruins of the orc village or outside of the Devil's Nest entirely, going back and forth from the town to bring in more supplies. There was no way that those carriages could be using this animal trail that was in a completely different direction from the town and encampment. Then what are these wheel tracks? Do they look like monster footprints to you? Adventurers probably passed through here a long time ago. The lack of horse hoof prints is proof of that. The rains washed away everything except the deep wheel tracks. The soldiers and adventurers here decided that this man's deduction was reasonable, so they didn't bother reporting it to the higher-ranking individuals of the extermination force. Parties of adventurers brought carriages into the Devil's Nest from time to transport large quantities of materials. Defeating orcs and huge boars would yield a lot of meat, while cutting down ints would yield valuable timber, but carriages were necessary to transport these items that would weigh hundreds of kilos through the Devil's Nest. There were space attribute mages that could transport luggage in a subspace, and there were also magic boxes created through alchemy by these space attribute mages. But both of these were rare, so the vast majority of adventurers didn't have access to these. And so these members of the extermination force assumed that these wheel tracks had been made by such adventurers. They would discover that this was an incorrect assumption 2 weeks later. By that time, Marshal Palpapek and Viscount Balches had grown increasingly impatient and the extermination force's tension had all but vanished. There are carriage wheel tracks leading outside the Devil's Nest. Why did nobody realize this earlier? Gordon shouted in rage at the subordinate who had delivered this news. Since the wheel tracks were heading in the complete opposite direction from the town, towards the Boundary Mountain range, nobody paid it any attention. And while vampires might use a carriage, nobody had thought that the ghouls would be. Monsters like goblins and orcs generally didn't use carriages. No, they couldn't use them. They didn't possess the knowledge required to build them. Monsters like vampires who hid in human societies and lured humans to cooperate with them had ways to obtain carriages, but the only cases in which goblins and orcs possessed carriages were when they plundered them from humans. They would use the carriages roughly without being able to perform maintenance on them and often eat the animals needed to pull them, so the carriages usually broken were abandoned or taken apart for materials to build houses. Even though ghouls were far more intelligent than goblins and orcs, the same should have applied to them. That was why even the experienced adventurers hadn't come to the conclusion that the ghouls were using carriages for transport. The knights and soldiers who had been instructed to listen to the advice of the adventurers had thought the same as them. But they had searched the Devil's Nest over and over without finding a single ghoul, and the ghouls had never attacked. And there were deep wheel tracks leading outside the Devil's Nest, as if dozens of carriages had all passed through the same place. There was only one possible conclusion. Cheat, that damp used carriages to run away with the ghouls. How did nobody notice? What the hell are the spies doing? Riley shouted these words, but everyone knew the answer to his question, including himself. The spies had been keeping a proper lookout between the Devil's Nest and the town. What Marshal Palpapek had been cautious of was the potential of the ghoul advancing on the town from the Devil's Nest, not the possibility that they would escape in the opposite direction towards the Boundary Mountain range to the east. That was why all of the precious spies had been positioned to the west, between the town and the Devil's Nest. To think that the Damper leading a pack of hundreds of ghouls would run away without fighting, we've been tricked. High Priest Gordon let out these words with a frustrated groan, and the extermination force's expedition came to an end. But other than him and Riley, who had missed out on a chance to add more achievements to his name, the rest of the extermination force returned to the town with expressions that were happy rather than bitter. They had also missed out on the chance to gain money and add achievements to their own names from defeating the ghouls, but they had collected quite a lot of materials, magic stones and body parts that served as proof of having killed monsters from defeating the other monsters in the Devil's Nest. And since the nation had funded the expedition's expenses, they hadn't lost anything. The knights and soldiers had been getting paid higher salaries for being on a dangerous expedition, and they had been eating the meat of mad boars and such that they wouldn't normally get to eat often, so they were very satisfied. Viscount Balches was dancing for joy inside when he heard the news that the ghouls had escaped towards the Boundary Mountain range and the extermination force hadn't sustained any casualties. If soldiers and knights had died, he would have had to pay money to their families as compensation and find replacements for the lost personnel. He was a little uneasy about the fact that the ghouls hadn't been exterminated and the threat hadn't completely disappeared. But beyond the mountain range, there were countless devil's nests so large that his entire territory could easily fit inside them, and the monsters living inside them weren't on the level of noble orcs. It had been told since the Age of the Gods that numerous dragons, which were designated as disaster-level monsters, lived there. He had a strong feeling that there wouldn't be much difference if a few hundred ghouls were added to those monsters. Viscount Balches was more interested in the forest-like Devil's Nest, whose monster population had been largely decreased by the 1,000-strong extermination force. Since there were no longer any powerful monsters living there, if the rest of the monsters were hunted down and mages were hired to purify the tainted mana there was a chance that this devil's nest could be transformed into prosperous farmland. With thoughts like these running through his mind, he didn't have many brain cells spare to devote to worrying about the ghouls and damp. To think that they would run away, with an expression as if he had swallowed dozens of bitter bugs, Marshal Palpapek dispatched spies to check whether the ghouls had really run away towards the mountain range, and then turned his attention towards other things. Now that the ghouls had escaped, he would have to enter a political battle with the finance minister, who would be making complaints such as, "Was such a large budget really needed?" And could it be that you were simply planning on using the nation's funds to help purify the devil's nest in the Viscount's territory and turn it into usable land? The one who had benefited the most from this incident was Viscount Balches, whose territory had increased and could potentially benefit greatly in an economical sense. And because the adventurer who had obtained the information regarding the damp Vandali had promptly vanished and the expedition had ended in failure, none of the information that he had provided was recorded in the written reports. The only place that information remained was in the memories of a few of the people involved. In the discussion on the day after the victory feast, Vandali told the ghouls of the humans that were going to march on the devil's nest. Naturally, their angry response was, "We'll ambush those humans. We've become strong. No matter how many hundreds of humans come, we won't be defeated." As Vigoro raised his fist valiantly into the air, many of the ghouls agreed with him. Their levels had increased in the battle with the orcs, and more than a few of them had increased in rank as well. Indeed, the ghouls' strength in battle had grown substantially. However, "Sorry, Vigoro. We can't win this battle." Vandali declared that they wouldn't be able to win against the humans. "Why not? King, we're strong. We won't lose to the humans. With you here, we can win. Why are you saying we can't? Let's fight them together." The ghouls' opinion seemed to be unanimous, and Vandali chose his words carefully as he replied. "Yes, we've become strong. If humans attacked with equal numbers as us, we would win. But unlike orcs, the humans will make the preparations they need to defeat us, and they will come into the devil's nest from outside to kill us. This time, we are the ones on the defense. A surprise attack like when they had attacked Bugogan's village would be impossible. The humans would gather numbers and add high-quality individuals among their army as well. And they will keep coming at us until we are defeated. If we defeat their first extermination force, they'll send another, and if we defeat that one, another after that. There will be no end to it. Even if the first extermination force was successfully repelled, the shield nation of Mage would certainly not leave such a dangerous pack of monsters alone. They would definitely send in a second extermination force. If this were a conflict between humans, there would be movements to find a middle ground and suppress the conflict at this point, but ghouls were monsters to humans. And the Devil's Nest was only 3 days' travel from the town. There would be no compromise. Unless the ghouls did something about the entire shield nation of Mage, they wouldn't stop. No, the Amid Empire would step in before Mage came to ruin. There was simply no end to this for Vandali and the ghouls. It is as the boy says. Since the humans originally gathered their forces to exterminate the noble orcs, there will be numerous adventurers and knights strong enough to have defeated that noble orc boss. Mew. As Zedaris voiced her opinion, Vigoro said no more, only giving a low growl. But even as Zedaris spoke against Vigoro's advocacy for war, she had a bitter expression on her face. They had just managed to defend the village from the noble orcs. It was only natural for her to feel this way. The ghouls weren't even thinking of attacking the human town. They would be satisfied if they could just continue living in the Devil's Nest as they had been up until now. Despite that, the humans were deeming them dangerous and sending an extermination force to kill them. For the ghouls, it was absurdly unreasonable. And though Vandali didn't show it in his expression, he felt ashamed. He felt bitter that he couldn't grant the wishes of the ghouls he thought of as his family, the ghouls who loved him so dearly. If he could build dozens of sturdy fortresses, erect a stone wall surrounding the whole Devil's Nest and make an army of thousands of golems, he would be able to protect this Devil's Nest. And we have people that we need to protect. Most of the women that had been rescued were pregnant, they were in no state to fight. Of course, there were also Bilda and the other ghoul women who were also pregnant with ghoul children. Nobody wanted to expose them to danger. Yes, what we want is the survival of the species. We should choose a defeat where we save as many people as possible over a victory where we sacrifice many and only a few survive. Terra. As Terra spoke with a sigh, the ghouls' desire for war subsided completely. There were still many who truly wanted to fight. But Zedaris was clever, Vigoro was silent, and Terra was convinced. In this situation, the ghouls whose society was founded upon respecting the powerful couldn't voice their objections and simply had to agree. But what will we do from now? Hiding would be impossible, and even if we were to run, ghouls needed a devil's nest to live in. The ghouls' reproductive capabilities declined even further outside devil's nests, and there wouldn't be enough prey to feed this population. It would also likely be impossible for them to suddenly cultivate the land to start using agriculture for food. I have an idea of where we can escape to, though it's a bit far away. However, as Vandali explained about the devil's nest found by the undead bugs that he had released in case the ghouls were unable to defeat the noble orcs, the problem of where they would escape to was solved. Their destination was a devil's nest ruin, past the western edge of the Boundary Mountain range. Best of all, he had discovered that there were undead in the devil's nest. Because of Vandali's teeth attribute charm skill, they would instantly become allies. With that being solved, discussions were over quickly and the ghouls immediately began preparing for the big move. The first step was to deforest the devil's nest to the point of making the ants that lived here extinct. Vandali used the gathered lumber to make carriages, cursed carriages, one after another. It seems that I have many kuhais now. The spirits used for these carriages were those of the orcs and other monsters that they had killed in large numbers several days ago, so they didn't possess skills like precise driving. But as long as they were sturdy carriages that moved on their own, that was enough. And then the female adventurers completed their transformation into ghouls. They didn't even get a chance to get accustomed to their new bodies before they and the pregnant women were loaded into carriages to leave the devil's nest. Vandali had confirmed that there were no spies in the direction of the mountain range using lemures and undead bugs, so it was not a particularly hurried departure. And then it was April. Over a month had passed since the ghouls had left the Devil's Nest forest. As part of the leading group of the ghouls, Vandali was sitting in Sam's carriage. The road was steep, but the journey was going well apart from 3 problems. Surprisingly, the mountain range isn't anything special. It's funny to say that while completely wrapped in furs, cold weather clothing for crossing the tall mountain range had been made from the furs of animals that they had hunted in the Devil's Nest forest. Ghouls were far sturdier than humans, so they were mostly unaffected by altitude sickness. The ghouls' energy had decreased a little from having left the Devil's Nest, but that was compensated for by Vandalia's strength and follower skill. The mountain climbers of Earth would question whether their current equipment was enough, but they could proudly say that it was. The one thing that was more likely to be a problem than their equipment or materials was the road. Steep paths and cliffs that even mountain climbers would have to risk their lives to climb were frequent. "Boy, I'll leave the road to you." Okay. However, as long as Vandali's mana didn't run out, it wasn't a problem after all. After turning the mountain surface into golems, he could just use golem transmutation to make roads that the carriages could pass through. If the roads were narrow, he would make it wider, and if there were steep cliffs, he would dig tunnels through them. At first, Vandali had thought of using golem transmutation and his mana to brute force his way through the mountain range, tunneling under it instead of trying to cross over it. But a tunnel large enough to fit carriages going through could potentially cave in, and there would be huge problems if they came across an underground water reserve, so he decided against it. And not long after the ghouls passed through, the roads would turn back into narrow paths and steep cliffs. Worried that the Shield Nation of Mage's spies might discover them, Vandali had made it so that they couldn't be followed, and this turned out to be a great success. In fact, several days later, the spies dispatched by Marshal Palpapek around a month behind Vandali and the ghouls were at the foot of the mountain range. They decided that further chase would be impossible and returned to the town. So if there were any problems, they were monster attacks, nursing the weakened ghouls and the rush of babies. Chapter 26, Overcoming the Difficulties, Standing Before a New Land. This mountain range apparently, its official name was the Boundary Mountain Range. It wasn't the boundary between the Amid Empire and Orborn Kingdom, but supposedly the boundary between the world of humans and the world of monsters. For this reason, the mountain range was mostly unexplored land and there were devil's nests all over it. Passing through it with these numbers would cause monsters to assume they were prey and attack. However, Since Vandali and the ghouls were avoiding the devil's nests and building their own road through, the monsters that attacked them were the weakest ones living on the edges of the devil's nests. I defeated a wolf that looked like a hedgehog. Vigoro, I have never seen that monster before, have I? I wonder if it is tasty. Terra, looks delicious, looks delicious. Bastia. In addition to that, they were monsters so unintelligent that they didn't understand how dangerous it was to attack a pack of hundreds of ghouls, so they were killed immediately and offered their meat to use as food and fur to use to make more cold weather clothing. Their stores of orc meat had decreased considerably recently, so this was very welcome. However, there were still times when large monsters attacked. It's a flock of wyverns. Today, a flock of wyverns was attacking them from the sky. These creatures whose front limbs were also their wings were the lowest form of dragon-type monsters and were less intelligent than other dragons. Scholars in this world were disputing over whether they should be classified as demi-dragons. They didn't breathe fire or use magic, but they were rank 5 monsters that were exceptionally adept at maneuvering through the air with sharp fangs and claws that were just as dangerous as they looked. If their flight could be prevented, they would be about as strong as a rank 4 monster, but this was a mountain range at an estimated altitude of over 2,000 meters. No matter how one looked at it, the wyverns had the terrain advantage. Despite them being unintelligent compared to other dragons, they were plenty intelligent compared to animals. They gathered together and attacked in large numbers and aimed for the back of the line of carriages and other places where the defense seemed thinnest, so they were quite problematic. There were 5 wyverns in the flock today. It was quite a troublesome number to deal with. Gah! As a command came out in the ghouls' battle language, their warriors simultaneously fired their arrows while the women released various spells. But since the ghouls had been living in a forest and their prey had been creatures that would approach to try and eat them, their proficiency with long-ranged attacks was relatively low. There were quite a number of ghouls with theachery skill, including Bastia, but their levels with this skill wasn't very high. Jaya The one they could rely on at times like this was Bonebird, who had become a rank 4 Spectre Bird. Since Bonebird had reached rank 4 and was strengthened by their strength and follower skill, even the wyverns couldn't let their guard down against it. As if instinctively sensing this, 2 of the 5 wyverns flew towards Bonebird. They had decided to commit 2 wyverns of the flock to quickly take it down, rather than simply keep it busy with 1 wyvern. Preventing Bonebird's movements would remove its biggest strength, its mobility, so the wyverns had made the correct decision. However, as the transparent lemures finished, they released their powerful bloodthirst. The wyverns were thrown into confusion by the bloodthirst that attacked their natural instincts. 3 of them turned their bodies around to try and get away, while the movement of the other 2 faltered. Aim at those 2. Nikuyu. A flood of arrows and spells assaulted the 2 wyverns. With their movements slowed, they were simply practice targets, and their scales weren't hard enough to block the spells and the arrows fired with the ghoul's superhuman strength. The 3 wyverns had chosen to escape and defenselessly turned their backs towards Bonebird. Bonebird fired spirit feathers at one of them and mangled its neck with its talons. 3 wyverns fell onto the mountain's surface while the other 2 fled in a hurry. Vandali raised his hand towards the 2 that were escaping, but then lowered his hand again without doing anything. You have to save your mana, Van, so helping us with your lemures is enough. Bastia, this great journey will become difficult if you were to collapse. Botchan. Please take care of yourself. Sam, yeah, I know. Vandali had been thinking of testing whether he could use death attribute mana to erase the lift force that the wyverns needed to fly. But since he was responsible for making the roads, if he were to collapse from running out of mana, the ghouls would have to stop moving while he recovered. If a landslide or something occurred in such a situation, it would be a huge problem. And so Vandali had to pay much more attention to his mana pool than usual while they were crossing this mountain range. Even Vandali's mana pool of 110 million mana wasn't enough to face the entirety of nature. And I think that's plenty of meat. As the young ghoul woman who had poked her head out from the carriage said, the 3 wyverns would provide enough nourishment to keep the ghouls' hunger and fatigue at bay for today. Though they were the lowest class of dragons, they were still dragons, so their meat was delicious and nourishing. Their organs could be used as materials for alchemy, but they were nutritious to eat as well. In addition, their scales, bones and wing membranes could be used as materials to make armor, while their fangs and claws could be turned into weapons. But to defeat 3 wyverns out of 5 if you took these to the Adventurers Guild, you could live in luxury for a while. Kaka, could you defeat them? Kuka-san? Vandally, no way. I wouldn't even want to fight one of them. Kuka shook her head as she spoke. She had been a female adventurer that Bobio had captured and turned into his private property, but now she was a ghoul. Noble orcs were individually stronger than normal orcs, but they weren't as fertile, so she had been rescued by Bazdia's group of ghouls before becoming pregnant and then undergone the ghoul transformation ritual. The guild considers us dead and I'd much rather be a ghoul than treated as a woman that monsters used as their plaything. I don't even have a family, anyway. Kuka. Back then, she had been mentally broken, but she had recently recovered enough to say such things. But it seemed that she still feared men to some degree, so she was riding in Sam's carriage. Since Vandally was a child and Sam was an undead, they were apparently fine for her. They stopped to dissect the wyverns' bodies and Vandally set bone bird and lemurs in the sky to keep watch. The fact that they were under such dangerous attacks at least once a day showed just how harsh crossing this mountain range was. Normal adventurers wouldn't have lasted more than a few days. If it weren't for Vandally's abnormal amount of mana and status effect resistance escal that prevented him from being affected by altitude sickness, he wouldn't have lasted very long either. But monster attacks were also an opportunity to obtain fresh food. The next problem was more complicated. Jaya. Kaiwan. With the carriages stopped, a black goblin child tried to take tottering steps to get down from the carriage, but instead fell onto the ground and burst into tears. Surprised by that, a black kobold child burst into tears as well. Hey, you can't get out of the carriage. What is it? Are you hungry? You're such a greedy child, aren't you? Two ghoul women each picked up one of these children and began to breastfeed them. They were this goblin and kobold's mothers. Many of the ghoul women Vandally had rescued from the noble orcs village had been pregnant. Well, that was the purpose that they had been held captive for, so it was only to be expected. Vandally had indirectly suggested that it would be possible for him to use death attribute magic to cause abortions for them, but the mothers had rejected his offer. If we care for them from the time they are born, they will grow up to obey us. Zadyrus, apparently that's how it was. If times were peaceful, they wouldn't have gone so far as to use their own wombs to raise goblin and orc children, but in this time of crisis, they apparently declined abortion to increase their numbers as much as possible. Because the villages of the ghoul women that had been held captive had their men wiped out, they had to compensate for the loss in working force. Incidentally, all of the goblins, kobolds and orc children were born with black skin and fur. Goblins normally had green skin and orcs had a light pink tone. Kobolds normally had black fur sometimes, but all of them being black was unusual. Vandally guessed that his mana was the cause of that. Thinking that it would be bad if the fetuses that the ghoul women had decided to give birth to were affected by the ghoul's departure from the devil's nest, he used mana transfer to transfer his thick mana to the pregnant women and their unborn children. As a result, the fetuses developed at the same quick pace as they would have done in the devil's nest and were born healthy. Though they were black, for some reason. It wasn't a bad thing, and nobody intended to complain that they were ominous or anything. But just in case, he examined them with appraisal to find Black Goblin Baby, Anubis Baby, Orcus Baby. These were the names displayed for the Goblin, Kobold and Orc babies. For some reason, they were new races. I wonder what this means? Tell me please, Darwin-sensei. Vandally, who is that, Van? Was it one of the horrible researchers in that world called Origin? Bazdia. No, it was a very famous person in the history of another world. Vandally, who had inadvertently created new races of monsters, looked up at the heavens with a distant gaze, but he was likely looking to the wrong person to answer his question. Well, it is alright, is it not? They seem cleverer than normal goblins, stronger than normal kobolds and more well-behaved than normal orcs. Zadyrus, don't worry about it, those children just need to be trained by the men. That's how it was for me, too. Vigoro, yeah, I've only been trained by Vigoro as well. Bazdia. Zadyrus didn't seem deeply concerned with the birth of the new races, while Vigoro and Bazdia told Vandally about the relationship that ghoul men had with children. Well, even if Vandally were to be concerned about it now, it was too late. He had already shared his mana with all of the pregnant women. That reminds me, I used to give you milk like that too. You would be reserved at first, but then you would start drinking it in a daze. Hello, anyone? He suddenly seems to be in agony. Kuka. It is fine, Dasusama was just reminiscing of the times when used to breastfeed him. Hearing that is what is causing Botchan his agony. Saria. Botchan, you're still a child so there's nothing to be embarrassed about. Please have some more confidence. Rita. As Kuka couldn't see Dasa, she was naturally surprised to see Vandali silently agonizing over something. But this was just a regular scene for Saria and Rita. Even Zadaris and the other ghouls who couldn't see Dasa weren't surprised at this point. The problem of the rush of babies was that Dasa would reminisce of the past, causing Vandali to suffer in embarrassment. But this rush of babies would soon be over. Monsters reproduced quickly. The women who had been held captive would give birth to the last of the children soon. Monster children developed quickly, so they would stop being breastfed a month after that. Vandali, if the child in my belly is a boy, can I really name him after you? There are 2 pairs of Takutan in your name, so it'd be perfect as a lucky charm. Bilder. As Vandali could tell from looking at the large abdomen of Bilder, who had been pregnant for 7 months, she and the 9 other ghouls pregnant with ghoul children would be giving birth soon. Incidentally, ghouls apparently developed at the same pace as humans. If I solve the birth rate of ghoul children, I'll be dealing with this for years more to come. Vandali. As a spirit, Dasa's memories were a little broken, so some things caused her to repeat the same words over and over again. As Vandali wondered if he simply had to get used to this, his eyes became distant again. And the last problem was taking care of the ghouls whose physical conditions had deteriorated from having left the Devil's Nest. They were paying attention to make sure that nobody was becoming sick. Tara had become particularly weak. I am terribly sorry, Vansama. Tara had aged to the point that Vandali felt the urge to answer with you promised not to say that, Ototsu-an. She had been healthy while living in the Devil's Nest. She had even been excited about the migration. But when they left the Devil's Nest, her body and mind had both grown weaker. How pitiful. Show a little more spirit, will you? Zadiras. It is just unnatural for you to be so healthy when you have aged even more than me. Tara. It seemed that her old age was indeed the cause of this. However, Vandali had used the Youth transformation to revert Zadaris's physical age to match her mid-teen physical appearance. Since ghouls had the unique characteristic of not aging after pregnancy, nobody had noticed this. However, cough cough, we were even able to obtain wyvern materials, but I am in no condition to use them. When I was a human, I touched them once. They are materials that I yearned to use. Tara. Once we arrive at the new Devil's Nest, you'll become healthy and be able to make equipment again. Vandali. Vandali patted Tara's back and comforted her while checking to see if he could see the shadow of death. When her time came close, he intended to use a Youth transformation in her as well. Having strange rumors float around would be a cheap price to have Tara regain her health. Thank you very much, Vansama. But instead of worrying only about me, you also have to take care of that girl. Tara pointed to the live dead that was lying down nearby. The live dead that Luciliano had abandoned showed no signs of movement other than its heartbeat and breathing. Since it was just like a living corpse, it needed someone to take care of it. The live dead was an undead in the sense that it didn't have a soul. But since its body was living, it would starve to death if it didn't eat, become sick if left in unsanitary conditions, and develop bed sores if left lying in the same position for too long. Even though it didn't have a soul, treating it like that wouldn't be pleasant to see and might even have negative effects on the unborn child. The live dead had been made pregnant by the noble orc Gogan, and Vandali had thinned out the monster genes and had the spirit of the woman whose corpse had been used to make the live dead possess that fetus. That fetus was now developing inside the live dead. It was only the 2nd month of pregnancy, but there was already a small bulge in the live dead's abdomen, perhaps due to what was left of the noble orc's genes. Well, taking the wyverns apart will probably take a while, anyway. Vandali pulled the live dead next to Tara along with the entire rug that it was lying on. Kuka silently wondered how those thin arms and legs were so strong, but he also possessed the superhuman strength skill. Since his physical strength already exceeded that of an adult man, there was no need to use magic for a task like this. Since everyone else around were ghouls who had been born with their superhuman strength skill and undead, Kuka was the only one to be surprised by this, as she had been a human until 2 months ago. What shall we talk about today? Oh yeah, let's talk about what we're going to do at the Devil's Nest. We're going to. Taking no notice of Kuka's feelings of surprise, Vandali began talking to the live dead, or more accurately, to its abdomen. In a television program on Earth, he had seen that talking to unborn children was good prenatal care. If he remembered correctly, it was a documentary about how geniuses were born. Though Vandali's uncle had banned luxuries from Vandali to a bizarre extent, he was surprisingly open-minded about things that he didn't consider luxuries. Thanks to this, Vandali was able to watch television, though not often, and even access the internet. His uncle's standards of what was a luxury and what wasn't varied from day to day. so Vandali had to be cautious and didn't feel a shred of gratitude towards his uncle for that. However, when they arrived at the Devil's Nest, they would repair parts of the ruined city, find beast monsters with delicious meat. If there were remains of an old public bathhouse, then Vandali wanted to repair that too and soak his body in the baths, and next time he would definitely succeed at fermenting walnuts and acorns to make something close to miso. Vandali talked to the baby about these bright future prospects without mentioning the bitterness of his past lives. He accidentally let some of his knowledge from other worlds slip, causing Kuka to tilt her head in confusion at the mention of miso, but Vandali took no notice of it. When we are doing things like this, we really seem like a family, don't we? Tara, what kind of family structure is this supposed to be? Kuka. Tara smiled as she spoke while Kuka questioned her words. It was easy to tell at a glance that all of them were of different races, but if one ignored that, then perhaps the scene could be imagined as the older sister, Tara, and younger brother with a large age gap, Vandali, looking after the pregnant mother. The live dead. Mew, that Tara, getting ahead of me and calling Van her family. Basdia, ha, do not worry about it. I am sure she thinks she has become his grandmother. Zadyrus, I can hear you, you know. You, Vansama, I am being teased by Zadyrus, who is 30 years older than me. Tara, yes, everyone is my family. Vandali. And so the ghouls' journey across the mountain range went smoothly, thanks to Vandali's skillful management of his mana. You have acquired the engineering skill. Half of the month of May had passed and it was now the time of year that people on Earth would have just finished enjoying Golden Week when Vandali and the ghouls finally arrived in front of the Devil's Nest ruins. The Devil's Nest ruins were in a basin between two mountain ranges, wide enough to take 3 journeys to cross by foot. It was easy to imagine that when people had lived here, there were crop fields expanding in all directions. It took us about 3 months to get here. To get to the Orborn Kingdom, I'd have to cross another mountain range, so let's say it takes another 3 months. Even if the Mage Shield Nation hadn't sent that extermination force, it might have taken me about a year. Vandali. No, I think it would have been even faster if you, Sam and the undead were to travel alone. Basdia. Vandali, who was now almost 3 years old, gave a sigh as he thought about how far away the Orborn Kingdom was. And then he got fired up again, knowing that this was where it really began. From here on out, he would enter the Devil's Nest ruins and work hard with everyone to make it a place that the ghouls could live in. Vandali looked up at the Devil's Nest ruins that had a mysterious atmosphere to it that would strike fear in the hearts of novice adventurers. There were tall stone ramparts that had once been sturdy, but now they were crumbling in places and eroded by the plant life. What had once been a town was visible beyond them, a tragic sight of countless ruined buildings. And the town was visible beyond them, a tragic sight of countless ruined buildings. And the white castle that was still towering into the sky somehow resembled a fleshless skeleton. But what was even more ominous about it was that despite it being a ruin with nobody living there, there was a thick presence floating in the air. The stirring of trees could be heard despite there being no wind, and harsh cries echoed across the ruins. It froze the spine to think that these noises weren't necessarily made by living things. This Devil's Nest definitely contained monsters that even Zadyrus and Darsa wouldn't know about. And some of those monsters might be of a high rank. Vandali had confirmed that there were a lot of undead, but that didn't mean that all of the monsters would be undead. It was even possible that dragons inhabited this place, and there might be dangerous dungeons as well. This was the place that the ghouls had to build a village to live in and find a source of food and materials. Vandali had used the undead insects to survey the area, but there were a lot of things that he couldn't see properly through the shared vision of the insects' compound eyes, and many of them had been unexpectedly crushed by monsters or mysteriously stopped responding to him. From here, Vandali would have to use his own eyes and ears to challenge this dangerous, unknown world. I've started to get excited. This unknown adventure caused Vandali's heart to throb not in fear, but excitement. Since he had always lived in a limited world on Earth and in Origin, he felt excited every time he visited an unknown land. He didn't like that they had only come here because they were running away from the extermination force, but that didn't make the new world that expanded into the horizon before his eyes appear any duller. Well then, let's set up camp just a little outside the ruins. Vandali. Everyone, make preparations to set up camp. Zadyrus, station some lookouts. We're close to a Devil's Nest, so don't let your guard down. Vigoro. And so the ghouls earnestly began their preparations to set up camp. Because a new adventure was awaiting them, they had to make sure that their physical conditions and mana were at their maximum. Incidentally, after the rush of babies, the population of the group was closing in on 600. Orcs were generally born one at a time, but goblins and kobolds were typically born in groups of 3, and apparently that didn't change even if they were born from the wombs of another race. And so there were around 50 black goblins, 100 Anubises and 60 Orcuses. Their population now exceeded what Boggan's village had achieved. King, help me with my study. King, I picked up a strange bone. I'm giving it to you. Fuga? King, did you get smaller? And perhaps because of the influence of the death attribute mana that they had received before they were born, or perhaps simply because they learned from their parents, they were very attached to Vandali. Vandali was happy about this, but I wonder if a nobleman can be a ghoul king on the side? Vandali whispered these words to himself as he looked up at the Orcus that was already larger than him at the age of 2 months. Name, Vandali race, Damper, Dark Elf age, 2 years, 11 months old title : Ghoul King job, non-level, 100 job history, non-attributes, vitality, 48 mana, 113,807,904 strength, 42 agility, 17 stamina, 47 intelligence, 89 passive skills, superhuman strength, level 1 rapid healing, level 2 death attribute magic, level 3 status effect resistance, level 4 magic resistance, level 1 dark vision mental corruption, level 10 death attribute charm, level 3 chant revocation, level 1 strengthen followers, level 4, level up. Active skills, blood sucking, level 3 surpass limits, level 3 golem transmutation, level 2 no attribute magic, level 1 mana control, level 1 spirit form, level 1 carpentry, level 1, new. Engineering, level 1, new. Curses, experience gained in previous life not carried over, cannot learn existing jobs, unable to gain experience points independently. Monster explanation, black goblins. These are a new race of goblins created by having death attribute mana applied to them before birth. Their base rank is rank 2. Their abilities are greater than those of goblins, and all of their attribute values are also higher. As they possess the dark vision, status effect resistance and enhanced agility skills from birth, they can move around in complete darkness as if it were in the middle of the day. They are resistant to poison and illnesses, and they are very fast. They are smarter than regular goblins, possessing intelligence equivalent to that of kobolds, and if taught, any individual black goblin can learn martial skills and use weapons. Normal goblins have a lifespan just short of 20 years, while black goblins can live about twice as long. Only their fertility and urge to breed are weaker than those of normal goblins, possessing lower levels in their breeding and endless sexual stamina skills, and some do not even possess these skills at all. Black goblin children also take longer to develop to maturity. While normal goblins living in a devil's nest require only a month to reach adulthood, black goblins require 6 months. They are physically a little larger than normal goblins, and as their names suggest, they have black skin. They have pointed ears and slanted eyes like normal goblins, but they have a somewhat more human-like appearance. As this race has only just been born, it is unknown if there are any superior races of black goblins. If one were to report the existence of black goblins to the Adventurers Guild with proof, they would be rewarded handsomely for reporting the existence of a new race of monsters, but that would be difficult at present. Skill explanation, status effect resistance. This is a skill that provides resistance against not only poison, illnesses and curses, but also fatigue, stress, sleep, hunger, asphyxia, pain and any other condition that causes the skill's owner to not be in peak form. However, it does not provide resistance against the effects of having expended too much mana or wounds caused by taking damage. Those with a high level in this skill can always be in peak form despite any negative effects they may be under. However, it does not nullify the negative effects, so there is a limit to this skill's effect. Those who possess this skill are centaurs, titans, draconids, demons and others of the races created by Veda, so most who do possess it do so from birth. After acquiring this skill, one can increase its level by experiencing things that affect his or her status. However, it is difficult for one who does not possess this skill from birth to acquire it. The reason for this is that one would need to endure negative status effects for a certain amount of time. According to the Adventurers Guild's records, there are 2 ways to do this. One method is to come under the effects of poison and illness at the same time and endure that, and the other method is to acquire separate resistances for each and integrate them together to gain the status effect resistance skill. According to those records, there has never been a person who has survived the first method, and none have acquired the skill in less than 10 years using the second method. In addition, the effects of their mind corruption skill cannot be mitigated by this skill. This is because the status of one's mind being corrupted is considered a normal status for that individual. Chapter 27, In a New Land. Apparently I am the prophesied Holy Son. The spies that Marshal Palpapek had sent out to follow the ghoul's tracks came back soon after reaching the boundary mountain range, just as he had expected. The report they gave was a strange one, something like, the mountain range was too precipitous for carriages to pass over, but for some reason there were traces of carriages passing over them. Could the damp have turned the carriages into special magic items? No, probably not. However, the fact that they crossed the mountain range is a fact. With that being the case, giving further chase would be impossible. After receiving this report, Thomas Palpapek readily gave up on the damp extermination that the vampire had requested of him. In the first place, for him, dealing with the damp wasn't something that he absolutely had to succeed in doing. It was not as if the vampires would kill him for failing, he would not lose his own life. His position as the marshal and his court rank as earl were solid and firm. He would simply use another opportunity to fulfill the vampire's requests, endure finance minister's unpleasantries and focus on dealing with this political opponent. This mistake was certainly one that he could recover from. Of course, he was angry at the damper and his pride had been scarred. But even so, Thomas Palpapek wasn't a naive enough man to try to finish the damp with no regard for the costs. That is how it is. Sorry, but I will not be able to assist you people any further with finishing this damp. That was why he wore a calm expression as he delivered this information to the vampire's familiar that had come to his room as usual. Though the vampire often mocked Thomas with his words, he would have also expected that Thomas would give up on the chase. Defeating the damp shouldn't be a completely necessary task for the vampires, either. According to your theories, that damp is the ghoul king and he is now headed beyond the mountain range, correct? Vampire. That was why Thomas felt a little surprise when the vampire spoke not words of ridicule, but this question in a sour tone. That is right. TCH, things have become troublesome. Oi, you really cannot assist us any further? You cannot try to make something happen? Vampire. Even through the familiar, Thomas could hear clear impatience in the vampire's voice that he never would have expected. It was as if the vampire had made some huge blunder. Send out a request for adventurers, or stir up that religious fanatic. You cannot do anything? Vampire. To be making suggestions that you yourself know to be impossible. You seem to be quite flustered. Indeed, it was possible to send out a request to the Adventurers Guild without mobilizing the soldiers and knights, as long as the funds were there. However, one would have to risk their life just to cross the mountain range. What kind of whimsical people would accept a request that required them to cross this mountain range that contained an unknown number of devil's nests, eliminate a damp who was traveling with hundreds of ghouls and then cross the mountain range again to return home? Even if he offered enough money to bring his family of earls to ruin, it was likely that none would accept it. Even the renowned religious fanatic High Priest Gordon had wanted to give chase, but the church had persuaded him otherwise and he had already left this land for his next holy task. What is the matter? Are you saying that there is something special about this damp? It has nothing to do with the likes of you. Vampire. With a shout that didn't even attempt to conceal the vampire's irritation, the familiar took off through the open window. Thomas had a puzzled expression on his face, but he decided that if it had nothing to do with him, he was better off not knowing. And so he stopped giving the matter any further thought. Even though there were dealings between him and the vampires, it was not as if he wanted all secrets to be shared. In fact, there were many things that he was better off not knowing. There was certainly something special about that damp. If there wasn't, there was no way that it could have survived as a breastfeeding infant and then brought the ghouls together. However, this level of something special wasn't enough for Thomas to pay the damp any particular caution as the nation's marshal. The Orborm Kingdom contained powerful monsters. This country was constantly exposed to a huge number of threats. The damp was only one more threat added to that number. It was not a pleasant incident, but it was nothing to become flustered about and make a commotion over. As long as the nation's military strength and economic power were gradually increased while keeping their guard up, there was nothing to fear. No matter how much power the damper and the ghouls amassed, they wouldn't be able to destroy a fortress in a single instant like a high-ranked dragon would. Noticing that the black tea in his cup had gone stone cold, he called a servant to replace it. He decided that after drinking this tea, He would take a rest and stop paying any further thought to the vampire who seemed like he would be busy soon. The vampire whose familiar had flown out of the marshal's house, Sir Krent Osber, was a man whose appearance suited his position as a nobleman of vampire society. But right now, he was clicking his tongue over and over, scratching his head and violently swirling the red liquid inside his glass. Foolish, so foolish, damn it all. Sir Krent. If other vampires could see Sir Krent loudly grinding his fangs together, they would question his nobility, but he didn't have the luxury of worrying about his manners right now. As Thomas Palpabek had guessed, the appearance of a damp wasn't a threat to the vampires who followed the evil gods. It was an event. Leaving cases where the parent was a purebreed aside, dampers didn't pose a threat when the vampire parent was a noble-born or subordinate vampire. They would simply execute both parents, and the one who had succeeded in doing so would be praised by the higher-ranking individuals that ruled the faction. It was just a game like that. However, there were some exceptions. Those exceptions were when the damp matured to adulthood, amassed his own power, or headed to the Barngaya continent's southern region, the Warhammer's handle that was separated from the head by the mountain range. Sir Krent had been commanded by the purebreed vampire that was his parent to at least prevent these from happening. As adult dampers possessed roughly the same strength in battle as their vampire parents while having almost none of the weaknesses of vampires, there was a high chance that they would become troublesome enemies. If such dampers gathered power, they would be able to use their strength to create powerful organizations. There had been a case where an entire country was ruined and the vampire community hiding that country's shadows was annihilated. The leader of the mercenary group that had achieved this feat was a damp. Though that fact wasn't widely known in human society, it was a well-known story among vampires. And the southern region of the continent beyond the boundary mountain range was still inhabited by vampires who followed the goddess Vida. Though their overall numbers were low, many of them were surviving purebreed vampires. There were even whispers that some of them had fought alongside the true ancestor against the god Elder and the champions 100,000 years ago. If dampers were to join the faction of vampires that followed Vida, in the worst-case scenario, there could even be a war between the two factions. Though it was difficult to believe, the vampires of the Vida faction felt no shame in recognizing dampers as Vida's children, even if they possessed mixed blood. There was no knowing what they would do. But Sir Krent didn't have to worry about that. The traitor, the subordinate vampire whose only redeeming quality was his strength against sunlight, had already been dealt with. He had passed information about the Dark Elf Mother to Marshal Palpabek, and as a result, that religious fanatic had burnt her at the stake. He had not managed to finish off the crucial one, the damper, but there was no way for an infant of breastfeeding age to survive on its own. That should have been the case, but for some reason, it had appeared in a devil's nest and was even leading a pack of ghouls. Even so, the Marshal had mobilized the army to eliminate it, so Sir Krent had thought that would be the end of it. That was why he hadn't stepped out to deal with it personally, nor had he dispatched his subordinates to do it. However, Sir Krent's expectations had proved to be naive. The damp had somehow led the ghouls across the mountain range. It was possible that they were simply traveling along the mountain range while slipping through the sight of the Marshal's spies. But even Sir Krent knew that relying on that possibility without any confirmation was dangerous. This cursed, audacious, mixed-blood child. You have done things in the wrong order. Sir Krent. How could he gather power before even becoming an adult and cross that extremely dangerous mountain range? Sir Krent murmured these words, to which Vandali would undoubtedly reply, because you guys drove us into a corner, ! Deciding to report to the noble-born vampire that was his superior, he stood up and rearranged his disheveled hair with a comb. He really didn't want to report his failure, but he was bound by magic in such a way that he couldn't neglect to do this. Sir Krent was the one pulling on the strings attached to the back of the Mage Shield Nation's Marshal, Earl Thomas Palpabek, but he was just another vampire in a management position. Geez, why have the materials been processed so badly? There's pieces of meat still stuck to the wyvern hides, and this needle wolf fur is full of holes. I am sure you just used your claws to make this mess. Did you forget about all the times I told you to use knives? Tara. After coming down from the mountain range, Tara had become incredibly lively. She seemed to have become a different person after her condition had improved. It was almost enough to make Vandali think that her weakness had simply been caused by altitude sickness. However, Tara's old age hadn't changed, so he would use a Outh transformation in her once things had settled down. Well then, we'll be going to take a look inside the Devil's Nest. Vandali had recovered his mana after resting overnight and had decided to do a reconnaissance inside the Devil's Nest before bringing everyone inside. He could have scouted with lemurs and undead bugs, but he would be able to see the most with his own 2 eyes. And there was also a need to test how much the undead of the Devil's Nest ruins were willing to obey him. The scouting members were Vandali, Sam, Saria, Rita, Bonebird, Zadiris and several ghouls of rank 4 and above. The rest of the ghouls would be protected by the ghoul warriors led by Vigoro as well as Bone Monkey and the rest of the undead. Leave everything to us. Vigoro. Make sure you come back safely, Van. It's a man's job to go out, hunt prey and then return to where the women are waiting. Bastia. Yes. Bastia, please take care of her as well. Vandali. Leaving the live-dead in Bastia's care, Vandali departed with his party. He looked as if he was going on an excursion, but he was aware of the heavy responsibilities placed on him. In the Devil's Nest's ruins that he was stepping into, he had to secure a source of food for the 600 or so ghouls and monsters. Vandali was the one who had led them here, after all. Since Vandali could stop decomposition with death attribute magic, there was no cost to preserving food other than some of his mana, and it seemed that there was a clear stream of water flowing from the mountain range into the waterways of the ruins, so water wouldn't be inconvenienced to find either. Even so, his heavy responsibilities were heavy indeed. Do not be so nervous, your shoulders are stiff. They are very stiff, boy. Zadiris. Ah, right there. Phew, this is heaven. Vandali, the boy who would soon turn 3 years old, was having his shoulders massaged by the woman who would turn 293 this year, post-youth transformation. Now that Vandali thought about it, this might have been the first time he was experiencing someone massaging his shoulders. His eyelids fluttered in response to the intense pleasure. Ah, no, I can't fall asleep when we're about to leave. Sam, let's go. Vandali immediately erased the sleepiness that he was feeling with his passive skill, status effect resistance. Certainly. Sam, and so Vandali and his party stepped foot into the Devil's Nest ruins. The Devil's Nest ruins consisted of smaller Devil's Nests with different properties. The central area was a Devil's Nest with no signs of life other than vines and moss, and it was surrounded by a Devil's Nest of ruins that had been swallowed by a forest. Though they were all part of the same ruins, since there were clearly different regions, it was highly likely that the monsters that appeared in the regions would be different. And that quickly proved to be true. Juga. With a strange-sounding roar, a monster that looked like a 3-meter-long wolf with countless needles growing from its back attacked them. It was one of the monsters that had attacked the ghouls on their journey across the mountain range. Vandali and the ghouls had been calling them needle wolves. They were about rank 3 in strength, and though they were wolf-like in appearance, they didn't form packs and mostly appeared on their own. Rita. Jayubi. Needle wolf. And though they were ferocious, they were not very intelligent. Normal adventurers would struggle to deal with those fangs, claws and the needles that covered the fur of their backs, but it was a foe that the living bikini armor Rita could easily turn the tables on. Incidentally, though the needle wolves were like wolves, their meat was rich and delicious. Also, the fur on their bellies was soft and fluffy, making it perfect to use in clothes and drugs. I've just thought of this, but could it be that these things aren't hedgehog-like wolves, but wolf-like hedgehogs? Vandali, that could be the case. They do not form packs, after all. Sam, well, either way, one needle wolf provided almost 200 kilograms of food including its organs, so they were good prey to hunt. As the ghouls prepared to drain the blood from the needle wolf, a spray of water came from the river the waterway. Shea. 3 sharks with bodies over 2 meters long leapt at the ghouls from the water with their mouths open, teeth bared. Ghoul, fish aren't supposed to fly. Ghoul, stepping in front of the ghoul warriors who were surprised at the sight of flying sharks attacking them, Zadiris chanted her air attack spell, creating a fist of air that punched one of the sharks hard. Vandali blasted a second shark with a mana bolt with as much mana as he could fit into it, while Rita took the head of the third with a single flash from her glaive. Father, this is my first time seeing fish this large. Rita, this may be a dolphin or a whale creature that I have heard stories about. Sam, Sam don't know, you are well informed. In the Devil's Nest that we came from, there were no such large fish or aquatic monsters. And you lot, why did you lose your presence of mind just from seeing these whales fly? Have you all been slacking since your ranks increased? Zadiris, sorry, Chief. Ghoul, GRR, we have embarrassed ourselves. Next time, we won't be surprised by flying whales. Ghoul, no, I think they're sharks. Vandali, Sam had always lived in an inland area with no nearby ocean and only knew about aquatic creatures from what he had heard from others, while Zadiris was only familiar with river fish. As Vandali explained that they were sharks, not whales, he remembered seeing a low-budget movie with similar scenes. He named these monsters flying sharks. For now, let's avoid draining monster blood near the waterways. Vandali, since sharks were sensitive to the smell of blood, if they drain monster blood near the waterways, they might have to fight an endless stream of flying sharks. Draining the monster's blood was only to make them weigh a little less anyway, since he could preserve the meat using death attribute magic. They decided to get away from the waterway, take apart the flying shark whose head had been cut off and take only the liver and fillets of meat with them. They tossed these in the back of Sam's carriage along with the needle wolf before continuing their journey. Botchan, why are we taking the fillets with us? Sam, if you prepare it right, I think it's a food ingredient that's good for the body. Vandali, if Vandali recalled, shark fillets were good if they were dried after having the skin removed. He had a good feeling that they would be high-quality ingredients, though he didn't have high hopes for the liver oil as they weren't deep-sea sharks. They headed deeper into the Devil's Nest, aiming for the region that the undead appeared in, and as they passed by a half-collapsed building an enemy attacked from inside the building. Vandali, just as Vandali said that, a number of large creatures covered in scales jumped out of the building. They possessed eyes with vertical slit pupils like reptiles, mouths filled with teeth just as sharp as the flying sharks, and stood upright on their rear legs that had claws like knives. They were only around 2 meters tall, but other than that, they were exactly like dinosaurs. However, Vandali pinpointed where they were hiding in advance with sense life, so though they were planning to take the ghouls by surprise, the ghoul warriors reacted immediately and defeated them one-sidedly. Vandali. Vandali gazed at the motionless dinosaurs with an emotionally moved expression on his face. He had felt the same way when he saw wyverns for the first time, but this was a real dinosaur, creatures that could only be seen as extinct fossils on Earth and in origin. In elementary school on Earth, Vandali's uncle had forced him to cancel his participation in the school excursion to the museum. For him, dinosaurs were a symbol of prehistoric times, and seeing an impressive dinosaur skeleton in a museum one day was one of the things he had wanted to do before he died. Boy, I think we should be moving on. Zadyrus, King, these huge lizards, do they taste good? Ghoul, let me see, they do not seem to be of a dragon race. Sam, however, for Zadyrus and the others, since they were not dragons, they were simply rank 3 or 4 lizard monsters, so they were puzzled to see Vandali acting like this. If we can collect enough to use as materials and have some left over, maybe I can make skeleton specimens for my own personal museum. Vandali only realized the confusion of the others quite some time after his dreams grew. After the dinosaur raptor attack, Vandali and his party were attacked several more times. They were attacked by small fry monsters like goblins that could be found anywhere and enormous dragonflies. Even the imps that Vandali had only rarely encountered because of the deforestation by Bugogan's village had slow movements, so they were not difficult enemies to defeat as long as they were careful of the branches and vines that they swung to attack. They also fought some stronger monsters of rank 4 and above, including another raptor attack, an enormous, 5-meter-long saber tiger, and a horn bull that attacked by shooting the 30-centimeter-long horns that grew all over its entire body. And what they learned through all this was there are quite a lot of monsters in this Devil's Nest. Sam, really? It's good that there is a lot of prey, but we are hardly making any progress. Saria, there were so many monsters, and most of them were ferocious. Monsters attacking of their own accord made it more convenient for ghouls to hunt them, and if they were of this strength, small groups led by ghouls of rank 4 or higher wouldn't have any problems defeating them as long as they didn't let their guards down. But since the attacks were so frequent, Vandali's party hadn't even traveled 1 kilometer since entering the Devil's Nest ruins. Even taking into account the fact that there were crumbled buildings and roads that they couldn't pass through because they had been overgrown with Even taking into account the fact that there were crumbled buildings and roads that they couldn't pass through because they had been overgrown with vegetation, it was a pace so slow that it was hard to say that the search was making any progress. Is it because adventurers don't come here that there are so many monsters? Vandali, that is probably part of the reason, but there are probably no ghouls in this Devil's Nest. That is why even though the needle wolves are unintelligent, the goblins that are supposed to be cowardly and seemingly intelligent monsters like raptors attack us. They do not know how powerful we are. Zadyrus, adventurers didn't come to thin the monster population in these Devil's Nest ruins that was sandwiched by the boundary mountain range on both sides. That was why the monster population here just kept growing. In addition, since ghouls didn't inhabit this devil's nest, the monsters didn't know how strong Zedyrus and the ghouls were and simply attacked these intruders. If these theories were correct, the ghouls would have to hunt the monsters in the adventurer's place for a while. If the monsters learned how strong the ghouls were and stopped attacking them, this place could become a perfect environment to build a village in. Well, it seems that most of the monsters have stopped attacking us already. Zedyrus glanced at the line of living dead walking in succession behind Sam. Vandali had turned the prey that wouldn't fit into Sam's carriage into undead. Many monsters were ferocious and wouldn't even hesitate to kill other members of their own race. Even so, they would not bare their fangs aggressively at members of their own race unless they were starving, cornered, or the conditions greatly favored them for the fight. The sight of members of their own race that had been killed and turned into undead was easy to understand proof to the monsters that Vandali and his party were stronger than them. Needle wolves and goblins still continued to attack them recklessly, however. Also, let's make sure to avoid the waterways as we proceed. Vandali, indeed, those creatures were sensitive to the smell of blood. Zedyrus, wary of the flying sharks. The line of undead proceeded to make their way towards the center of the Devil's Nest ruins. The center of the Devil's Nest ruins that they arrived at was indeed in ruins, but at the same time, it was a pleasant sight that could be called a work of art. An enormous castle still towered towards the sky, and surrounding it were numerous buildings that still retained much of their past glory. And as if to make up for the almost complete lack of life in the area, there were human skeleton-shaped monsters all over the place. Skeletons, and with that size. They must be those of the Titan race that I have heard about. It appears that this was once a country of Titans. The height of the skeletons was well over 2 meters, and some were even around 3 meters tall. They didn't simply possess a long and narrow spine, their bones were thicker and more solid-looking than those of humans. And though Vandali and the ghouls hadn't noticed it from the outside where the damage to the buildings had been severe, but the buildings and implements in this Devil's Nest were all built very large. The large buildings made of stone had a typical height of 4 or 5 meters between the floor and the ceiling. Closer inspection of the bucket-like object that one of the ghoul warriors had picked up revealed that it was actually a broken cup. If Kaka was here, she might have remembered that 200 years ago, there had been a nation of Titans here. The Amid Empire had ordered the Mage Shield Nation to attempt an invasion to wipe the Titans out. Titans. They were the first race that the goddess Vida had birthed following the battle with the Demon King. After the Colossus god Zerno's heart was destroyed, the sun giant Talos was the only one of his followers with a noble spirit and sense of virtue that didn't turn to worship the evil gods. The Titans were the race born between him and the goddess. They possessed large, robust bodies. Titan shield bearers were even more reliable than castle walls, and yet it was said that if the Titans were to go on the attack, any castle walls would crumble before the might of this warrior race. Well, it's my first time seeing the real thing, though. Vandali had been born in the shield nation of Mig that was part of the Amid Empire, which discriminated against the races created by Vida. He had never even entered a town through the front entrance before. This was his first time seeing Titans. He wasn't the only one. Adventurers belonging to a race created by Vida were rare in the Amid Empire. Sam, who had been the employee of a nobleman, Zedyrus, and the other ghouls were also seeing Titans for the first time. The real thing you're referring to are just bones though, King. Ghoul. However, it seemed that there was someone who disagreed that seeing only a Titan's bones was the same as seeing a Titan. There are some that aren't made of just bones, you know. Vandali. But that ghoul went quiet as Vandali pointed at a Titan zombie emerging from deep inside one of the buildings. Well, it was possible that he still didn't agree but just thought it was pointless to point it out again. More importantly, he was more concerned about whether they could be so relaxed surrounded by hundreds of undead, but like in the dungeon that Vandali had once visited, there was no problem. Many of the undead were armed with rusted great swords, axes or spears with broken tips, but they didn't raise them and simply moved out of the way to create a path for Vandali and his party. One after another, they kneeled and bowed their heads. This behavior extended to Zedyrus and the other ghouls as well. They didn't show any signs of hostility. The undead are really being submissive even though they have not been tamed. It is one thing that they are not attacking us, but to see them behaving so defenselessly towards us is a surprise. Zedyrus: yes, I was surprised the first time this happened, too. Vandali had been prepared to use his magic in case these undead would be hostile towards the ghouls who weren't undead like Sam, but it seemed that this was a needless worry. This was just to make him feel at ease, but he used the no-attribute magic spell Appraisal to find Skeleton Warrior, Titan, rank 3. A monster created by a titan warrior turning undead after being killed. Hates all living things, especially those that killed it. The information he found was unexpected. Since his no attribute magic was level 1, when he had tried to use the same spell on the raptor corpses, yesterday, it only gave him the corpse of a dinosaur-shaped monster, so he hadn't been expecting anything this time, so he was surprised by the information provided. As he tried this on the other kneeling skeletons and skeleton soldiers, he learned short descriptions about the monsters in addition to their names. However, as he tried using appraisal on random weeds, it only gave him a weed. It seemed that when Vandally used appraisal on undead, he could learn information beyond what the level of his skill normally allowed him to learn. So, Botchan, what shall we do? Sam, let's see, I think they'll listen to what I say. So first I'll ask them if there's someone like a mediator for the undead and bring up the idea of migrating. Vandally considered the information that he had learned from using appraisal. Unlike Bone Man, who Vandally had created, these undead seemed to be corpses possessed by the spirits of the original owners of the bodies. Vandally thought that he might be able to communicate with them, but nobody would normally think of the idea of negotiating with the undead. But Zediris and the other ghouls were accustomed to undead Sam who they could easily converse with and understand, so they voiced no objections and Vandally's idea was, in fact, correct. From a partially collapsed temple-like building deeper in the ruins, a monster that looked different from the other undead appeared. Who could this be? Mysterious undead, an undead that looked like a mummy whose body was made of nothing but skin attached to its bones, wearing a robe that seemed to be that of a priest despite its ripped sleeves and yellow stains, walked directly towards Vandally and his party. The 3-meter-tall undead let out strange groaning noises as it approached, perhaps as if emotionally moved or perhaps something else. The ghouls raised their weapons in bewilderment, while Saria and Rita showed confusion on their faces, in their behavior. But as if he hadn't seen this, he stopped in front of Vandally and collapsed onto his knees to kneel as he spoke. "O prophesied Holy Sun, thank you for gracing us with your presence and descending upon the capital of the sun, Talisheim. Please grant salvation to us, who only await to return to dust." Mysterious undead, Zediris and the other ghouls only showed more confusion in response to the undead's words, but Vandally simply looked at him silently. With that said, he simply appeared calm because his eyes constantly looked dead with his expressionless face. In reality, he was incredibly bewildered, with the strange feeling that he would be receiving another title. The level of the death attribute charm skill has increased. Monster explanation. Anubises. These are mutated kobolds, created by being submerged in death attribute mana before birth. Their base rank is rank 3. All of their body's characteristics are superior to normal kobolds, and their intelligence is no exception. They lack the claws that kobolds possess on their hands and feet, but they are able to use their fingers more skillfully instead. They possess the dark vision and status effect resistance skills from birth, and they possess a large amount of mana, so many of them possess greater aptitude for magic than normal kobolds. Their urge to breed and fertility is lower than normal kobolds, being born in groups of 3 at most. While normal kobolds need only 3 months to develop to maturity, Anubises require 10 months. Their appearance is that of humans with dark skin and the black-furred heads and tails of dogs. If they conceal their heads and tails well, they could be able to disguise themselves as humans. Though this is a conjecture, it is estimated that while the lifespan of normal kobolds is about 30 years, the lifespan of Anubises is more than double that. As the Anubis race has only just been born, it is unknown what kind of superior races of Anubises may exist. If one were to report the existence of Anubises to the Adventurers Guild with proof, they would be rewarded handsomely for reporting the existence of a new race of monsters, but that would be difficult at present. Chapter 28, The Conditions in which the first objective can be achieved.
All right, guys. So this will be this will be the end for this session for today. And so far, it's looking really good for the parts that I have already edited. And I really wasn't expecting that I would be able to edit this in this quality. I'm actually kind of improving, but still, I would really like to improve my speed. I wish that I can do more, but this is so far my capability. But in the near future, I'm looking forward to like learning more stuff so that I can improve my skills, especially my speed in drawing. But and that I may also stop second guessing myself when I'm doing this stuff, because most of the time I was like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? I always keep second guessing myself when I'm doing this, but so far so good. The stuff is getting really good, in my opinion, and but there's still a lot of stuff that I really want to improve. Uh, Still not satisfied with how I'm uh, tackling some of the basic stuff, but yeah, I wasn't expecting also that I managed to make this rock really good. uh, yeah, this rock is pretty much so. Uh, Here we go. Yeah, this are the rocks that went from brown to gray. Pretty good. I wasn't expecting it to look this good. Maybe I'll change the leaves next time for this one. It's kind of too eye-catchy. Yeah, I should have controlled myself when doing this. But yeah, the grass is good already. I'll just probably adjust this, the ones at the edges, and add some more foreground elements. But other than that, it's good already. I'll add some over here also. And next will be this bushes over here. Then this sand. I'll make the sand texture as much as realistic, or depends. I'll see what I can do. I'm planning to like just lessen the details of the objects at the back, or the further parts of the image. But yeah, mhm. I guess these things are the design is getting really nice, in my opinion. Okay, so far, for the story, hopefully that I managed to uh, uh, record the entire stories better this time, not in a lower volume. I'm really sorry again for doing uh, that mistake last time, but right now we're in chapter. Let me check it again. Chapter 28. Yeah, so we've passed uh, the volume 2 mark. So we're in volume 2 right now, and it's getting really interesting. Now they've moved to a different what's it called again? Uh, just the demonist, where they're going to live in a new environment, and it's actually a ruins of an ancient city. So there's the titans there, some diseased titans that are zombified by his abilities, and some already that are zombified on their own. So he'll definitely convert those into his army, and there will be lots of interesting stuff, a lot of world building that will be happening in this chapter, this volume actually. And so yeah, look forward to more of the story that will come, and hopefully that you will also enjoy my designing after this. Okay, and with my designing, when I'll finish my design, when I deem this finished, I'll still continue to record this audiobook until I finish it, and continue some of my projects moving on. But I'm also planning to like buy some tutorials for graphics design because I'm seeing some really good sales, and I'm planning to improve my skills, like what I said earlier, so that I can do this faster. The faster I get, the more skill I get, I'll probably make more fan arts and more designs. Okay, especially for the perspectives and yeah, the proportions and stuff. Needs a lot of work. Hopefully, next time you'll listen again to this story and continue watching with my videos also. I'll try my best if I can try to fix the last video, but if not, I'm really sorry. And if you can just read the missing chapters of that were not recorded properly, it was probably, yeah, 23, 22, and 24, I think. Yeah, but yeah. So thank you again, guys, for watching this video, and hopefully we'll see each other again next time. And this is your boy Shrimp signing off. Peace.